close to the tracks again, we're going to be entering an area of Pennsylvania called Cobb's Gap. Now, before the Lackawanna Railroad was formed, right around 1852, there were actually two separate companies that later merged into what would become the Lackawanna Railroad. They were the Delaware and Cobb's Gap Railroad, which was chartered from Scranton, Pennsylvania, to go all the way to the Delaware Water Gap, and the Lackawanna and Western Railroad, otherwise known as the Leggett's Gap Railroad, which was chartered to go from Scranton north to Binghamton, through a place called Leggett's Gap. So Cobb's Gap, which we're going to be going through very soon, is a very scenic area. It's where the tracks parallel the Roaring Brook once again. It offers a very beautiful panoramic view of the Roaring Brook and the surrounding area. Around 1952, the Lackawanna Railroad actually celebrated its 100th birthday. And it wasn't because the Lackawanna Railroad itself was around, but because they actually traced the history of the two companies that merged back in 1852. That's how they justified being a little bit older than they actually were.
Morning.
Town of Elmhurst, Pennsylvania. Elmhurst. The town of Elmhurst can actually trace its earliest settling history back to about 1847. So one of the first communities that actually became incorporated were developed in the first place around this time in northeast Pennsylvania. Moscow, Pennsylvania. Here comes the freight station first. And the passenger station second. Both buildings were built by Fred J. Nice around 1904. The town of Moscow has some early history as well, developing around 1830 with one of the first settlers coming into this general area around that same year. Eventually, the Lackawanna Railroad, when they actually were chartered and merged, they actually would build their first freight and passenger station around 1856, which would eventually cement Moscow as being a permanent town in the Pocono Mountain region. Towns like Elmhurst, Moscow, Willsboro, and Tobyhanna all served different purposes. They all had different ways of making or having a community there. But one of the other ways in which they actually served the railroad and served the city of Scranton is they would actually have a particular Lackawanna Railroad have a train of accommodation, which would actually get workers from these towns, bring them over to Scranton, and there they would either be working in the mines or in the railroads, and at the end of their shift they would actually be commuting back to their own towns along the line. The train of accommodation lasted pretty much up until about the late 1930s, early 1940s, and then it was eventually phased out. One of the fun facts I always like to mention about Moscow, all of these towns that we're going to be passing through the Poconos have some storied history and some significant fun facts as well. But one of my favorite ones about Moscow is that most of its history was centered around the lumber industry. And so one of their mills actually milled lumber and sold it to the Steinway Piano Company. I always find that fact pretty interesting.
Usually, Moscow is where my usual excursions for Steamtown end. But for the first time, we're passing right through. Whoa.
A number of years ago, Elmhurst Reservoir was actually having some repair work done to it, so that's why they extended the wall a little bit up. But eventually, you'll be able to get a panoramic view over the reservoir. Once again, a nice place to see some birds of prey occasionally.
Oh, wow. That's...
section of the town of Elmhurst, which sat almost immediately underneath where the present-day dam is. So although there are no more physical remnants of that section of the town, that is where the footprint originally existed. Section of track, we had what was known as the Lehigh Y. Now, a Y is just like a turntable in that it assists trains in turning around to face the correct direction, except as opposed to a turntable, a Y doesn't spin you around. In that case, you're just going up into various locations and then just throwing a switch to go onto the right track. Now, the reason the Lackawanna Railroad had a Y in this section of the Poconos going towards Gouldsboro is that the Pocono Mountain Route that we're going through east Stroudsburg has a number of grades on it that are exceptionally hard on trains going up the mountain and then eventually downhill on the other side. To help with these grades going uphill up until about Tobyhanna, the Lackawanna Railroad employed what was known as pusher service. So what that would mean is you would actually have a steam locomotive or a number of steam locomotives attached to the rear of the train and just help push that train up over the Poconos until it got over to Tobyhanna and then it could go down on the other side. The Y actually was used by those pusher steam locomotives to actually turn around and go back to Scranton, where they would get ready to help the next train going east.